everybody. Welcome to a bonus episode from ABA Inside Track. We've been very fortunate that for many years now, our friends at the Thompson Center for Autism have invited us to speak at their conference. And this year was another excellent year. We had a great time there. You can hear a little bit more about it in our October preview. We'll have our talk come out like we did last year, probably sometime in the summer, our talk on should behavior analysts or why behavior analysts should study school refusal. We'll have that out over the summer if you weren't able to see us live in person there. But one of the things that we'll sometimes do, I don't think I did it the last year or two because it can be hard to time out. And sometimes depending on when our flight gets in, it's hard to do. But we get to go and see the student poster sessions and learn a little bit about some of the work that's going on at the Thompson Center, at some of the local universities as well. And I was planning to do it this year because it had been a while and I really love getting a chance to talk to people about their posters. But we had a really great guest at our booth. We usually have kind of a table where we can set up there. A great guest who you will hear in the bonus episode who came over and said, he just wanted to introduce himself and said the last time he'd seen us, he'd been able to do the poster session audio and he was only an undergraduate and it was such an exciting experience and he was jazzed to be back. And now he's starting his doctoral work. We were fortunate enough to get to speak to this person again. So you'll hear it in the audio. But again, it's one of those things that I think for some folks, I remember doing my first poster. It was very exciting to get to do. So and share, I think Jack Michael had come by one year when I was doing a poster and asked about the research that I was doing and it was just such a cool experience. And hearing that, and I'm ready to do it again, but just hearing about that, it's just so cool to get a chance to see students who are at various points in their career, because you never know when we might even have them back on the show to talk about some of the research that maybe they started way back when. So we were super excited to get out and interview a couple of folks at the poster session. We didn't get to everybody, of course, because there were a lot of posters and we only had so much time. But we had a great time. And we hope you will enjoy hearing about a lot of the different types of research going on in the Missouri area. So without further ado, here we are talking about the poster session at the Thompson Center for Autism Conference 2023. Please enjoy. All right, we're here at the Thompson Center Conference, and I'm talking with Shannon Locke, who has a poster on autism-specific stigma and belongingness impact on the autistic community, which looked very interesting. Shannon, could you tell us about your work here?
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually at the University of Missouri, a doctoral candidate there, my fourth year, and this is the beginnings of my dissertation. So really, I'm looking at a literature review focusing on who is autism-specific stigma that we know is evident. There's lots of research to support that. That comes from this historical progression through to the current outcome where we have individuals with autism internalizing that stigma and potentially contributing to their low employment rates and high suicide rates, high rates of depression and anxiety. So my research is interested in is a sense of belongingness impacting that. So we have mechanisms to assess this, but we don't have anyone looking at that, differentiating out between the students with autism and neurotypical students. Mm-hmm. Is there a difference between those two? And if so, what can we do about it? There is some literature out there to talk about how important it is that we move beyond just focusing on the individual into their relationships and their community. Mm-hmm. So that's the social ecological model. But again, there's not any research looking at autism specifically in that framework. So I did an initial literature review. I'm actually still in the process. It's not completed yet. Just using search terms, autism, belonging, peers, because that's what's important. Mm-hmm. Looking at what are the peer perceptions impacting, and stigma. And so far, finding very little out there in that very broad search.
But that's what you want in your literature review, right? You want to have like one article and you can really just milk it for the rest of the dissertation.
Right. So this will be the rest of my career, not just dissertation. There's so much that needs to be done. So clearly we need to look at, are there differences in sense of belongingness among neurotypical and neurodivergent individuals? Are there causal factors that are contributing to the masking and camouflaging harms that are experienced by students with autism? Are there ways that we can reduce that autism-specific stigma? We have lots of research on bias reduction for racial biases and gender biases, but no one's looking at, autism yet. So anyway, yes, there's a lot of work to do. And this is just the beginning step-off point that say, there's a lot of work to do.
Oh, it's always good to have on the poster. And Shannon, I appreciate you have a reference. If I see there, will I get the initial 2000 that you started with an identification?
No, my references scan will just give you the references based on the research that's included here.
Okay, so fewer. It's a smaller number.
It's a one-page reference list.
Okay,
yes,
great.
Absolutely. But yes, my records identified started with 2,266. I've gotten through the first 250. I still have a ways to go, but so far we've only found, 48 that might even be remotely related.
Sure.
So
I always want to ask that. I can just ask you too, Diana. But when you're looking for your terms, looking for terminology, are you using just, find and replace on Google Docs, something like that? Or are you actually thumbing through at these initial stages?
So for this search, I'm using EBSCOhost platform, and they're really good about pulling up the results. And they give you the title and the abstract.
Okay.
So I'm reading the title and abstracts for each of these articles to determine whether or not it meets my inclusion criteria.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah. So it's not quite as onerous a task as this. Sometimes it looks like just read it and see the flow chart.
Yeah, no, I don't have to take time to open each one of these articles or find each of these articles. The abstracts are given to me. And so that's why it's an initial search by just title and abstract. From this, the 48 or whatever I collect that I think might be related, then I'll go through and open all of those articles and just make sure.
Excellent. Well, I can't wait to see a sequel poster, perhaps, sometime in the future. Or the document itself, I suppose, would be fun, too.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
All right. We are talking with Arden Shoup and looking at a poster that has a lot of brain pictures. So I hope there's some good explanations on these. It's altered functional connectivity, sensory profile, and camouflaging in individuals with autism spectrum disorder. And usually we don't do a lot of kind of neuroimaging type discussions, but camouflaging is something we're aware of. So we were fascinated. So thank you for taking the time to explain the poster to us.
All right. So for those who don't know, functional connectivity is taken from pictures in fMRI. The way an fMRI machine works is that it sends out magnetic signals to the atoms in the brain, particularly involving hydrogen atoms in water molecules. And so since it's magnetic, the protons are going to, have a reaction to that. And all the atoms are going to line up. The MRI is then going to send out some radio signals. Those aren't going to have a magnetic effect on them. The atoms are going to move back to the original spot they were in. And then they're going to send radio signals back. That's the data that the MRI machine collects and can use to create images of the brain. And it's called BOLD data, stands for oxygen level dependent. And so it's measuring the amount of oxygen in different areas of the brain. And that's how we can determine which areas are active, which areas are inactive at the same time, at not the same time, et cetera, et cetera.
Arden, that's the best description of an fMRI process. I think my biology textbook back in high school was like, it's magnets and the brain.
Yeah.
That's about all I got. I didn't get anything with the oxygen, oxygen a little bit, but the water molecules. So thank you. That was very descriptive.
Yeah, it is kind of hard to understand. It is really complex. So I'm glad that I helped explain that. So functional connectivity relating to fMRI is specifically different areas of the brain are talking to one another, working together at the same time, even though they may not necessarily be close to one another. So we're looking at specifically amygdala and how that relates to camouflaging and the adult sensory profile. So for camouflaging, we use the CATQ, which is a self-report measure to determine the degree of social camouflaging or masking. However you want to refer to it, it's fine. And the adult sensory profile is another self-report measure that we use to measure responsiveness to various social stimuli and can identify processing deficits in those social systems. In these, I know you can't see the images on the tape recorder, but in these images, if it's red, then that means as the camouflaging scores increased, so there was more camouflaging, the left amygdala in this image was working together more with the other red areas. And then with the blue areas, as the camouflaging scores increased, it talked less with those areas. And that could possibly represent a deficit in those areas of the brain. Maybe they're supposed to be talking to areas more, but they're talking to red areas more. That research has done, at least in our lab. Yeah, true.
All right. So, and the scans were being, and I always have this question when I read anything with fMRI, the self-reports were done, then the scans were done, or the self-reports and the scans were happening?
They were not at the same time in our lab because this is resting state data. So the participants were just sitting in the fMRI machine, not doing anything.
Okay.
They could get out if they wanted to, if they weren't comfortable. Just 15 minutes, that's all right.
So you sort of would look at sort of like is there a correlation between
Yes,
reports
exactly.
and brain activities? All right.
This is just a correlational study. We're not looking for if this, then this. We're
This
just
is
looking.
the camouflage section of the brain kind of stuff,
Yeah,
right? That's
exactly.
not,
We're just seeing is at the same time.
Okay. And then, so using that data, I assume your lab is going to continue kind of exploring this or use that information for further studies?
Yeah. We're wanting to use this information to find some biomarkers. So right now we're looking at functional activity as a biomarker to lead to some precision medicine. So if people want treatment for autism spectrum disorder, again, it's a spectrum. Maybe what works for one person doesn't work for another person. We want to be able to provide that and possibly put connectivity could be a piece of the key.
Oh, okay. So one thing kind of in a multitude of brain regions that will be relevant for, maybe making further decisions or support for individuals.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of other studies out there about different biomarkers in autism spectrum disorder. Some of them look at white matter and gray matter. Some are looking at functional connectivity. It's all kinds of different things, like different masses.
Okay. Well, Art, thank you so much for explaining it. Sorry, folks, you don't get to see the brain pictures. It's just for all of us here in person.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, we are talking with Riley Park about her poster, An Invisible Population, Autism in the Foster Care System. Sorry, Riley, I got a little distracted. So could you tell us sort of what you were looking at in your poster?
Absolutely. So my poster is on, basically I'm describing the results of the first year of the piloting year, actually, of the Foster Care Autism Diagnostic Entry Clinic at the Thompson Center. In the first year, we've seen about 30 or so patients. I have data on 23 of the patients that we've seen. So we have a specialty clinic for foster care youth because they tend to be pretty transient. It's really hard to capture their developmental history. So we saw a real dire need to have something that's more specialized and something that would help expedite the process of getting them into the psychological eval system. Mm-hmm. And so we've seen some interesting things. So compared to other clinics at the Thompson Center, I believe the rate at which we diagnose autism is a little lower. Because we ended up giving autism as the primary diagnosis about 44% of the time. And other times we ended up giving PTSD or ADHD as the primary diagnosis. And we also, in order to capture the complex, often really difficult experiences of these children, we end up giving what's called V codes, which are kind of in addition to the clinical diagnoses. So we end up giving things like, physical abuse, child neglect, upbringing away from parents to sort of better capture their clinical presentation. One thing I'll say too, that we have found to be really important in our work is to really think about the parsimony of diagnoses, right? So these are kids who are trying to get adopted, trying to get a placement. If we think that their clinical presentation can be summed up sufficiently well in like 2 to 3 diagnoses, we want to do that. We don't want to send them off with like 10, 15 different diagnoses just because they have, lots of symptoms. So, that's kind of, I think, something that's always been at the forefront of our mind as we did this work with this population.
Sure. And so what is going to be done with this data was just sort of to see, what were the general trends, findings, resources for the new year's kind of thing? Or?
That's a good question. So we're hoping that, once we have a little bit more data from more people, we could do some interesting comparisons. We might compare people, kids who we end up giving an autism diagnosis to versus kids who don't. Also look at gender differences. And then we also do want to, as next steps, follow up with them after we, send them off, do their feedback and see how well do they actually pursue the recommended services. Like, do they run into any barriers? Because we're pretty sure they do. Yeah. So we just want to do that sort of more longitudinal look at how they move through the system after our evaluation. Those are our next steps.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Riley. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for letting me talk about my work.
All right, we're here. We're talking with John Augustine about implementation of CW Fit to increase academic engagement for middle schoolers with autism. Yeah, totally. So
I did this study when I was an undergrad. I'm at Missouri State University. And so we basically identified this gap in the literature with students with autism, especially in middle school setting and general education setting, that they were disengaged, they were disruptive, and oftentimes led back into a special education classroom when their instructional level was a general education classroom. So we implemented CW Fit, which stands for Class-Wide Function-Related Intervention Teams, to increase and promote academic engagement, as well as increasing teacher praise statements and decreasing reprimand statements. So our research questions were, is there a functional relation between CW Fit and teacher praise and reprimand statements? Did academic engagement increase for our 3 students with autism? And what's the acceptability and feasibility of this class-wide management program for the students as well as the teachers? So it was a co-teaching classroom. So we had Pam and Aaron. Aaron was the co-teacher. She was a special education teacher. And there were about 30 students in the classroom in total. And then we only measured the target students, which were Angela, Andy, and Dwight, just because typically CW Fit literature measures whole class on task behavior. And we really just want to target those 3 students with autism to ensure that they were staying on task during lessons. So our dependent variables were teacher praise and reprimands, which was rate and then momentary time sampling for their academic engagement and the social grade. So we broke it up into 2 different methods. So the first was a training. The first meeting between the teachers was about 45 minutes long on the classroom behavior needs. So identifying what the operational definitions were and kind of the behaviors of these 3 target students and other students in the classroom to kind of promote that academic engagement. The next meeting was an hour and 45 minutes, and this was just going over the procedures. So the teaching of the pre-corrects, the goals, points, praise, the reward if the students met their goal, everything like that. And then the final meeting was about 30 minutes, which was role play, and both teachers kind of role played to myself and the other teacher in the classroom, the CW Fit procedures. And so these procedures are broken up into 4 components, which is component 1 is the lessons and the pre-corrects. So why we love CW Fit is because it teaches 3 common disruptive or academically disengaged behaviors towards those functions. So following directions the first time, ignoring inappropriate behavior, whether it's from peers or someone else, and how to get the teacher or student attention, raising your hand, waiting for them to call on you, stuff like that. So before each class period, the teacher would teach these lessons and the students would go at back. The first class took about 10 minutes, and after that, it was less than a minute to just go over these 3 rules. Then we utilized an interdependent group contingency. Basically, they split into groups, and if one of the students was off task when the interval went off, then that group didn't get a point. All students had to be on task in order to receive that point. Then goals, points, and praise. So we set the interval at 1 minute. Every minute, there would be a beep that goes off in the classroom, and that prompted the teachers to provide the points and look at the groups and say, okay, these groups are on task, as well as providing the praise. So if groups 1 through 5 were on task, they'd say groups 1 through 5, great job of ignoring inappropriate behavior. Here's your point. They would also set their goal before class. And if they met their goal at the end, they would get that reinforcer, that reward, which whatever they select. So here are the results. So on the x-axis is sessions, and on the y-axis is rate of praise and reprimands per minute. So in baseline, teachers about 1 reprimand and 1 praise statement per minute in the class. We implemented CW Fit. You can see there's an immediate increase and a stable level, and higher level of praise statements, and then a little decrease of the reprimand statements. When we removed CW Fit from classroom teachers, again, you can see praise statements were still kind of higher than reprimand, but there is not really that discrimination between the 2. Then once we implemented CW Fit again, an immediate increase in level, it's stable, high, and then the reprimands also decreased a little. Then we have the academic engagement of the 3 target students. So again, x-axis is sessions, y-axis is the percentage of intervals of academic engagement. So you can see in baseline, there are some moderate levels of engagement, but they're highly variable. Andy is the closed triangles, Angela is the closed circles, and Dwight is the open squares. We implement Fit an immediate increase, stable level, high level of academic engagement, around 100% on task for a 15 class period. When we remove CW Fit again, highly variable, moderate levels, even very low levels. And finally, once we implement CW Fit for the final time, near 100% levels on task during a 15 class period. So there was a functional relation between CW Fit, teacher praise and reprimand statements, as well as academic engagement. Teachers liked using CW Fit. There's 100% fidelity for all sessions. 2 of the 3 target students reported that they liked playing CW Fit. One of them said they didn't like it because he didn't like being by others in a classroom. And then 2 of the 3 students reported dislikes, such as if one of their friends was off task when the interval went off, then their whole group didn't get a point, even though they were on task. Some limitations, obviously, teachers reported, the co-teacher, special education teacher reported that it was hard to help students with academics because she was so focused on the behavior part of police, ensuring fidelity. And then one thing that I find, it doesn't sound good, but I find it interesting is none of these target students wanted other students in the school to play CW Fit, which sounds bad, but it's honestly kind of good because they didn't want others to get what they got with their rewards and having an opportunity to extra computer time or lunch or something like that.
Felt special.
Yes, totally.
Okay.
And
so they preferred getting that.
Yes,
that
they liked playing CW. If they wanted to get those rewards, they didn't want other people to have it. Maybe like a sharing intervention or something play or something. And then in the future, based on the limitations of the teacher reporting, there was a lot of behavior components. Kind of doing like a component analysis to identify the core components needed to increase academic engagement of kids with autism, emotional behavior disorders, or just the whole class in general. Or if that's even related to 4 components or just the teaching of skills, and you can reduce that to 2 instead of 3. And then also additionally adding a maintenance phase with outside researcher there as well.
Now, John, did you all, when you were looking at the results, because I see like the teacher behavior changed significantly when CW Fit was in place, when it was withdrawn. Do you think that had more to do with, or do you have hypotheses with that had more to do with the fact that the students were more off task, therefore the teachers were sort of going back to old reprimand type behaviors? Or was it something, which came first kind of a situation?
I would like to say that it came from CW Fit because in that training and in the CW Fit procedures, when that timer goes off, that's their moment to praise. It's almost like a self-monitoring or a discriminant stimulus for the teachers to record and look at the actual behavior of the classroom. So it was a moment for the teachers to kind of look at all the groups and say, okay, these 4 groups are on task. Then I'm going to give them a point. The point's not only going to work. We also have to praise them as well. So groups 1 through 4, great job. When I told you to start working, you went right to reading or whatever. So I would like to assume and hypothesize it's from CW Fit because they were trained and coached to when that timer went off and praise and look at the groups.
So everybody benefited from CW Fit rather than, one group and then one just sort of was being reactive versus very interesting. Thanks. So CW Fit is commercially available. It's just a research.
There's a QR code here and obviously people listening really see that, but I don't know if it's commercially available. They're doing a lot of research now. So they can go to the CW Fit website and kind of see and gain access to protocols for elementary school, middle school, and they're also going up to, I think, high school now. So they can request access and get trained by the CW Fit person.
I would be curious to see more research with using it, especially in middle school, because middle school, as we all know, is really, really terrible and hard for students.
And it's my favorite. It's my favorite age and grade. There is CW Fit. So this was just CW Fit, but there's now a CW Fit middle school protocol. So that hadn't come out when we did this yet. So there is kind of one for those older ages because some of these skills might be a little elementary.
Sure.
So they have a middle school program now, and they've done research with emotional behavioral disorders and other like elective classrooms like art in the special education setting. But we really wanted to focus on kids with autism because a lot of the times their instructional level was in that gen ed setting, but they were moved going back to SPED because of disruptions or engagement or challenging behavior as well. So,
well, John, thank you so much for going over this. It's so fascinating. Thank you. So I'm talking with Madison Imler about her poster, Accessibility of Behavior Analysis in Rural Communities, a systematic review. And Madison, I'll be honest, I think one of the first times I saw you have a map, which again, listeners aren't able to see your map, a very detailed map. One of the first time anyone was even talking to me about the idea of accessibility was probably at like a Thompson Center conference from a while ago, because they were describing how Missouri, as much as I think, there's St. Louis as an arch, and that's all they got. There's a lot of spaces, some of which might be considered rural, and then that continues on throughout. I'm from New England, where you're always in a crowd. There's no space. There's no rural areas anymore. So please tell me about kind of what you found when you were doing the work for your poster.
Yeah, so what I found is I looked at studies that specifically included rural populations in their participant sample. So they specifically targeted that population and what their implementation was of their intervention. So looking at like what were the variables they looked at or what was the modality of how they delivered that implementation.
and seeing what that looks like across studies. So I went through and I looked at 5 different databases, and I went through all the great literature, so dissertations, theses, and different journal articles. And I was only able to find 8 studies that specifically looked at rural populations. So they had to have specifically targeted that population and listed that in their participant sample. So it's very clear that was the sample they were looking at. And I did look at the last 10 years, and I looked across not just the United States, but just across all areas, what that looked like. So I ended up finding that across each of the studies, there was some kind of this technology component. And while technology is amazing in bridging that gap of accessibility in terms of location for these communities, in rural communities, it's very potential that those communities are already experiencing deficits in that technology. So whenever you have the solution, that technology is a solution for the barrier of location, then you have another problem of like, how do we access this technology? So then whether that be with just different access to internet, reliable internet, of course, and then, or if that looks like access to like relevant technology or the sustainability of keeping that technology in practice with the individuals that they're working with, whether that be in homes. We looked at homes and in schools and some teachers. So whatever it looked like across the board, how does that funding structure look like to maintain the technology that they implemented in the interventions?
It was the thought in kind of doing this, just sort of get that out, make them maybe more general like policy discussions that could be brought up. I mean, it's easy to say we need different and better technology. If it's really hard that one person can implement things like that.
Right. So honestly, that was a really forefront of my thought of like, what can I do with this? Like, I have this information, and really looking at like, obviously I can't change the funding structures and communities. If I could, I think I could solve a lot of problems. But unfortunately, I can't. So I was really looking at like, how does this look without the technology component being the main modality for the delivery of it? So looking at that, whether it's collaboration with just mental health centers across communities, whether that looks like working in health departments, maybe you have just like that coaching session come in, like maybe a BCBA or just individual comes in and they're able to provide informational sessions, whether it be to parents, whether that be to different school providers, just bring that into them without that principle of technology. So they're getting that base information, but then for families that need to access that information, maybe they get that initial connection of like, these are the principles I have, and then they can seek out different telecommunication process, whether consultation, telehealth, and those different areas. So maybe like a hybrid model of like, how do you integrate the both of them to be more sustainable for those families?
That's great. That's a great way to use information. What can't you change? Well, a lot. What can you change? Get some ideas out there. Excellent.
Exactly.
Very good.
Yeah. I had a great feedback earlier too. So some individuals that work specifically in rural communities and health departments, they said they have a lot of families come in and they get that diagnosis of autism, but then they're told that applied behavior analysis is a great therapy to help your child. But then they go to find those resources, and obviously they're so sparse within their communities, they feel like they're already failing their child in some way, even though they are. Absolutely not. Like, we obviously need more accessibility across the board, but to see that, like, what can we do to bridge that gap? And even putting the information of resources available in the hands of mental health providers or health departments that can reach those different communities in those areas, or kind of have that one-on-one connection with the members of their communities.
The more information we know, the more we can support other providers and get information out to families that need it. Excellent. Well, Madison, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
We're talking with Peyton Matthews about... also Chloe, how do you pronounce your last name? Whitty. Oh, that's a good name for academics. Chloe Whitty on their poster, Caregiver Experiences, Assessment Clinics for Youth with Neurodevelopmental Disorders. And you were telling me a little bit about the study before we started recording, but please tell me kind of what the general process was. What were you trying to answer?
So for our general process, we were just trying to get at how parents felt during their feedback for diagnostic evaluations. So what they experienced, how they felt, and how all it could be conveyed so that we could better our clinic opportunities for them. We don't have a lot of background information as far as research, so it was kind of just piecing together what we thought was super important for parents to tell us about in terms of how we could better our clinic. For our specific survey, we had a span of different clinic types. So we had autism, ADHD, neuropsychology, learning disability, and a majority of the people that responded were actually of kiddos from 1 to 10 years old. So we had a pretty young age group, which was kind of exciting for that like early intervention type clinic. And then this is a 15 question survey. This is still our pilot program, so we only have 57 respondents. We stopped collecting data about a month ago, just asking them some questions about how they felt, how the process went, if they had clear recommendations. And at the end, there were some open-ended questions for them to kind of just put in what they thought of how the day went.
And these are questionnaires given after the
so
meeting, discussing the diagnosis,
it's after the
results.
feedback session. And the feedback session for the autism clinics are same day. So we'll get that to them this same day. And then 2 weeks later, we'll send them this feedback session to kind of let it sink in and see how they're doing after that. But for those neuropsych evaluations and learning disability evaluations, we give that feedback about 2 weeks later. So then after that, we'll send that feedback. So about 4 weeks.
So from the pilot, I'm guessing the thought is you want a tool to decide what are you doing well, what are you not doing well, or can improve on.
Yeah.
What did you kind of find for these initial steps?
Yes. Survey started off as a QI, just a qualitative improvement. And then from the results, we found that there were a lot of people that, yes, they were getting a lot of strengths and like good things talked about from their kiddos, but they weren't going home feeling like they knew what to do about the struggles. Recommendations are hard because everything is giant wait list in the autism world, but parents were finding that they were waiting a lot longer than expected to fill out those recommendations and do those things. So for us, it's more making it clear and doing more follow-up in that time span. So they feel like they're supported even though they are on a wait list for certain things. And then making sure that they go home feeling like, yes, it's a struggle for your kiddo, but also here's how you can help in the meantime. Yeah.
So what's next for the survey? Version 2 come out or?
Definitely a version 2, probably 3, 4, and 5 after that. But
Try to get it done in 2. It's a lot.
But yeah, so we're trying to kind of narrow down some of the questions, simplify some of the wording. The most important part is that parents feel like they can do it quickly and efficiently, and then provide as much honest feedback as they can.
Well, thank you both so much. We hope you enjoyed getting a chance to listen to some of the really cool poster work and research going on at the Thompson Center and some of the other Missouri universities that were at the poster session. I always have a blast talking with people. I was so glad we got to do it again this year. I hope I didn't sound too out of practice with doing kind of my street audio, but hopefully you had a chance to enjoy listening to the presenters share their research, even though you couldn't be there to see the posters in person. Again, big thanks to the Thompson Center for having us out there and giving us this great opportunity. We're really excited. We'll hopefully be back again in 2024 doing another bonus. But we hope you liked getting a chance to hear some extra information. We'll be back to our normal episodes on our normal episode schedule. Until next time, keep responding. Bye.